stop sharing. There we go. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. All right, do you want me to get started, Sarah?
That would be great. Our next presenter is Amber Vinkasey-Ball, UCCE Veg Crops Advisor, and she's going to be talking about integrated pest management of processing tomatoes. Thanks, Amber.
Thank you, Sarah. So yeah, today I'll be talking about IPM of processing tomatoes with a focus on the Sacramento Valley. And first, I want to start off with an overview of IPM. So integrated pest management is an ecosystem-based strategy focusing on long-term prevention of pests and damage through a combination of techniques. These can include biological, cultural, and chemical controls working together. Pesticides are used only after monitoring indicates that they're needed, and treatments are made with the goal of removing only the targeted organism. Materials are selected and applied in a manner that minimizes risks to human health, beneficial and non-target organisms, and to the environment. And I also want to briefly mention that myself and colleagues from Cooperative Extension and UCIPM are developing a pest management strategic plan for processing tomatoes. This is funded by the Western IPM Center. It's a planning document that details pest management issues and management practices in a particular crop, and the input for this document is directly from stakeholders. So we held 2 meetings, both for the northern region and the southern region processing tomato growing regions, and we held these in 2019. And it's essentially a needs assessment that lists priority research, regulatory, and education needs for California processing tomato. And there's currently not one for processing tomatoes. And so we're expected to publish this in spring 2021. So be on the lookout for that. So an outline of what I'm going to be talking about today. The first part of the presentation will be on weeds, and I'll briefly discuss a cultivator trial that I conducted in 2020. Then we'll move on to diseases and mainly focus on soil-borne fungal pathogens, which are the biggest issues for tomatoes in the Sacramento Valley. Then very briefly talk about insects, and resources for this talk are from UCIPM, and most of the information can be found in the pest management guidelines for tomatoes. So we'll jump right into weed management. We'll start with post-harvest and pre-plant weed management. So crop rotation can effectively reduce weed problems by changing the environment that favors a specific weed species or by allowing methods to control weeds that couldn't be used in a tomato crop. For example, corn allows for the use of herbicides to control nightshades, yellow nutsedge, and field bindweed that you wouldn't be able to use in tomatoes. Other useful rotational crops include wheat, cotton, rice, dry beans, onions, carrots, and safflower. But it's not recommended to rotate with solanaceous crops like potatoes, peppers, and eggplant because they're very closely related to tomatoes and will have very similar weed issues. Field preparation, of course, avoiding fields with severe weed infestations if possible. Avoid moving weed seed into fields on equipment or clean equipment before entering clean fields. Deep tilling can reduce nightshade and nutsedge problems. And pre-irrigation rainfall can germinate nightshade species before planting for control with cultivation or with post-emergence herbicides. So more post-harvest and pre-plant management. Soil fumigation with metam sodium and metam potassium can provide control of many weeds and other soil-borne pests, but you'll want to make sure to leave enough time between the fumigant application and transplanting to prevent any phytotoxicity. Herbicides, of course, are great weed management tools. Herbicide applications made to fall or winter beds can allow for early plantings that you wouldn't otherwise be able to cultivate because of wet soil conditions. Rainfall is necessary to break down any fall-applied herbicides so that the following year's tomatoes won't be injured. Perennial weeds like field bindweed and little mallow can be controlled post-harvest by irrigating and applying contact herbicides. Some herbicides are best applied just before planting and incorporated into the soil. This is a common practice, at least in Colusa and Sutter counties, where Treflan and Dual Magnum are used. The entire bed top can be treated, or band treatments can be applied over the seed line. So these band treatments can reduce herbicide costs and the risk of herbicide carryover to the next crop. Post-emergence weed treatment may also be necessary before planting to control any weeds that have already emerged. At planting weed management, manipulating planting dates, if possible, will allow you to take advantage of weed germination under different temperatures. For example, early plantings under cooler soil temperatures can usually avoid any barnyard grass competition for young tomatoes. Transplanting, of course, which is pretty standard practice, gives the crop a growth advantage over weeds. And standard cultivation can further reduce weed populations along the side of the plant row. After planting, cultural practices like preventing weeds from going to seed and keeping canal banks free of weeds can help a lot. Avoid moving weed seeds into the fields on equipment, or clean your equipment before bringing it into the field. Keeping bed tops dry. This is easier to do with drip irrigation. By keeping the bed tops dry, less weeds are likely to germinate on the soil surface, though perennial weeds like field bindweed are still likely to remain a problem under drip irrigation. With furrow irrigation, maintaining alternate row irrigation prevents overly wet conditions. For cultivation and hand weeding, mechanical cultivation reduces hand weeding needs later. And in the Sacramento Valley, in-row cultivators like the finger weeders have been gaining popularity, and I'll talk a little bit about those when I get to my research trial. Also, post-emergence herbicides apply as directed on each side of the seed line and immediately incorporate, or you can do variable rate lay-by applications that will reduce your herbicide costs with no loss in weed control or tomato yield. So this would be applying full rate in the furrow and reduced rates next to the crop. Common weed problems in tomatoes are field bindweed, nightshades, nutsedge. I'll talk a little bit about broom rape on the next slide. And all of this information can be found at the Integrated Weed Management page with UCIPM. So broom rapes are root parasites. They attach to the host below ground, and at high densities, they can greatly reduce yield or result in crop failure. So there's two species that we have in California: branched broom rape and Egyptian broom rape. Branched broom rape is A-listed. It's a pest of known economic or environmental detriment that is not known in California or is present in limited distribution that allows for the possibility of eradication or successful containment. It's subject to state enforced action involving eradication, quarantine, regulation, containment, rejection, or other holding action. Egyptian broom rape is a Q-listed pest. This is an organism or disorder suspected to be of economic or environmental detriment, but whose status is uncertain. And this is because of incomplete identification or inadequate information. Both species have been detected in conventional processing tomato fields. And in other countries, broom rape causes up to 70% loss in tomato. In California, currently, we're scouting, reporting, quarantining, and then crop destruct. Our short-term goal is to minimize spread. There's no current data on control of either broom rape species with any California registered pesticides. So there's a need to develop mitigation approaches to stop this. Hopefully this broom rape won't spread significantly around the state. And Brad Hansen, a weed specialist at UC Davis, and his grad students are doing some work on broom rape and pesticides as well. So I want to talk about a trial that I conducted with my colleague Scott Stoddard down in Merced County this past year. We wanted to evaluate weed control time and costs of using automated and mechanical cultivators as part of a weed management program. So we compared these in-row mechanical and robotic weeders to standard grower practice and post-emergence herbicides. We had trial sites in both Colusa and Merced counties. So we used the RoboVator thanks to a vegetable weed specialist in Salinas, Steve Fenimore, who allowed us to borrow his machine. It's an automated weeder that uses cameras and vision technology to differentiate between the tomato and weeds. And I'll show you this in videos on the next slide. And we also use the finger weeder, which I mentioned is gaining popularity in the Sacramento Valley. I know a few growers who have purchased them this past year. It uses interlocking fingers to pull up weeds within the plant row. So we found that the RoboVator provided good weed control in the Colusa field, but caused significant crop injury in the Merced field. And when I show you the video, you'll see how this could be possible if the machine is not calibrated correctly. The finger weeder provided excellent control in Merced and very good long-term control in the Colusa field, up to 4 weeks. And we were funded by the California Tomato Research Institute, and we're currently working on the final report. So some of that data will be shared in a newsletter coming out soon. Okay, so here's the RoboVator, and you can see that the blades open around the tomato plant and then pull up weeds within the plant row. So if this wasn't calibrated correctly for spacing, you can see how it could also pull up tomato plants and cause crop injury. This is from the Colusa field where it worked really well. And then for the finger weeder, you can't really see it, but this is a 5-bed finger weeder that my grower collaborator purchased for 2020. And I just wanted to show how fast it can move through the field. Okay. Now we'll move on to processing tomato diseases. This is a summary table of fields with the most common diseases that I saw in the last 5 years. These are just fields that I was called out to with confirmed results from Cassandra Sweat's lab at Davis. She's our field and vegetable crops extension pathologist. Or these were confirmed with an AgDIA immunostrip tests for bacterial canker, and then double confirmed with her lab. So I'll be going through each of these in more detail. A lot of these diseases are wilts and crown rots, and they're very difficult to differentiate in the field. So I want to start with bacterial canker. There's 2 types of infections for bacterial canker, and I did see more of it in the field in 2020. Systemic infections are where the bacteria invade the plant. The oldest leaflets will curl. You'll see poor growth and wilt, and cankers may form at the nodes. There also may be some stem cracking. The source for the systemic infection is generally seed and transplants, or it overwinters in plant residue in the field. Secondary infections is where bacteria cause local infections on the leaves, stem, and the fruit. The margins of the leaves become infected. You'll see dark brown lesions like the photo of the foliage at the top here, irregular leaf spotting, and you may even see the bird's eye spot on the fruit, which you can see in this picture as well. Bacterial canker survives indefinitely on tomato tissue if it doesn't decompose. And certified seed will reduce your chances of infection, and also using clean transplants. If you do identify this in the field, do not work the field when the foliage is wet. This is how secondary infections can spread from contaminated equipment, splashing water, and this will lead to localized infections. Also, be sure to turn under any infected plant residue so it can decompose at the end of the season. And it is recommended to rotate to another crop for at least 1 season if possible. Now I'll move on to our various Fusarium problems in the Sacramento Valley. Fusarium crown and root rot, or Fusarium oxysporum radicis lycopersicii, is becoming more common and widespread. Any stunted, wilted, or older plants may die. It can also look like tomato spotted wilt virus or alfalfa mosaic with the foliar symptoms. You'll see yellowing on the margin of the oldest leaves and then necrosis. The plant will slowly decline over many weeks. And I wanted to note that the crown rot is a localized lesion on the plant. The stem will be brown on the outside and rotten on the inside, and you may often see the roots decaying as well. It overwinters and survives for many years in the soil as spores and is favored by cool soil temperatures and spread by machinery and transplants. There are some resistant and tolerant varieties available. And I wanted to note that this photo is a field that was co-infected with Fusarium crown and root rot and root knot nematode. So those 2 together really brought these plants down. Fusarium falciforme, some of you may have heard of this and some may have not. This is a new problem. It's a stem and crown rot and leads to vine decline. You may see branch or whole plant chlorosis, deep leaf curling, deformities, and little leaves. The leaf speckling can lead to leaf death, and then the whole plant dies. And these pictures are all from Cassandra Sweat and studies that she's done at one of the UC Davis research farms. Not all foliar symptoms will develop in all cultivars. So those are not really things that we can rely on for a diagnosis. You want to look for the foot, crown, and stem rot. That'll help you differentiate between other Fusarium diseases and virus, herbicide, or salt damage. Those are the only consistent symptoms is that foot, crown, stem rot. And that crown rot generally starts below the soil line. And you can see in these pictures how big this rot can get here on the crown. And there's still a lot to figure out about this disease. It was found in Sutter County in 2019 and in Colusa County this past year in 2020. And of course, Fusarium wilt race 3. If you grow tomatoes in the Sacramento Valley, you definitely know about this problem. This is a big disease issue. We see individual branches becoming yellow and wilting, and we call this the yellow flag effect, which you can see in this bottom photo here. You'll see internal dark brown discoloration that extends pretty far up the stem. We call this vascular discoloration. One thing to note is that it shows up later in the season compared to verticillium wilt. So you're unlikely to see Fusarium wilt earlier than 45 days after transplanting. It's favored by warm weather, drought stress, and a heavy fruit load. Infected plants will usually die and it can greatly reduce yields. It overwinters and survives for many years as spores in the soil and even on other plants without causing them harm. The Sweat Lab is doing, and her postdoc, Kelly, is doing a lot of work on Fusarium wilt and crop rotations to see what effect Fusarium wilt of tomato has on these crops that are commonly rotated with tomato. It's spread by soil on machinery. Management includes resistant varieties, which are great. But again, if you have root knot nematodes, sometimes the resistance can be broken, and we're going to be hopefully looking into this relationship with these fusariums and root knot nematode in the future. Cleaning farm equipment, again, avoiding nematode infestations, and rotating out of tomato for several years to reduce inoculum level. Verticillium wilt can easily be confused with fusarium wilt. Older and lower leaves are the most effective, and it has a very wide host range. So you'll see these yellow V-shaped lesions that narrow from the margin on older leaves, and then the leaves will turn brown and die. You can see this V-shaped lesion on the bottom photo here. You'll also see that vascular discoloration, the light tan discoloration appearing in the tissue at the base of the plant. The fungus survives as mycosclerotia in the soil and persists indefinitely. It's favored by cool soil and temperatures, and it's usually an early season issue. Like I mentioned, if you see a wilting disease before earlier than 45 days after planting, it's probably verticillium wilt and not fusarium wilt. It seldom kills plants, but will reduce vigor and yield. And management, again, sanitation and washing of equipment, and rotating to non-host crops like corn and small grains to reduce inoculum. I want to mention southern blight because it's been becoming a bigger issue in Colusa County, especially over the past few years. It's a destructive crown rot disease that rapidly kills tomato plants and has over 500 plant hosts. These can include sunflower, cucurbits, beans, many of the things that are commonly rotated with tomatoes. It persists year to year in crop debris and is favored by high temperatures, high soil moisture, dense canopies, and frequent irrigation. Southern blight may be around in your field, but it needs these perfect conditions to develop, so you might not see it every year. You'll see these small tan to reddish brown sclerotia form at the base of the plant or in the soil right around the plant. You can see them in this top photo. They're very small, small little brown spheres. And you can also see these white fan-like mycelium growing on the crown or into the soil. It's hard to see these two symptoms in tomatoes. So if you think you might have southern blight, we can take samples to Cassandra's lab and she'll grow it out on towels like these two pictures. And then you get those very clear symptoms. Plants go from healthy to dead in less than a week. It's a very rapid disease. And in the field, the disease patches will look roughly circular, kind of similar to the patchy distribution of root knot nematode infestations. And distinguishing the many different fusariums and these other crown rots and wilts like southern blight and verticillium wilt, there's really no quick tests for these in the field. We send samples to the Sweat Lab, or you can send them to private labs for accurate diagnosis because all of these diseases have very similar symptoms. And I want to talk about a study that we conducted in 2018, both myself, agronomy advisor Sarah Light, and then Cassandra Sweat, our extension pathologist. This was also funded by the California Tomato Research Institute. And we did this because the late planting dates and high temperatures from 2017 led to very favorable conditions for disease development. And we saw a lot of tomato fields and other like bean fields that had southern blight in 2017 very severely. So we monitored 9 fields that had confirmed southern blight in 2017. We monitored them in 2018 to determine the sclerotia levels while the fields were planted to rotational crops like corn and sunflower. So we found that southern blight sclerotia levels increased from the beginning of the season to the end of the season in all of the sunflower fields. It is a host of southern blight, so we expected this. But for the corn fields, it stayed the same or decreased. So corn appears to be a better rotational crop for southern blight than sunflower. And Cassandra has a postdoc in her lab developing a predictive model for southern blight. And so we're hoping that this will help the growers in our area predict what year southern blight will be worse. And I want to talk about root knot nematode. I saw some issues with this past year, again, with that complex of root knot nematode and these other crown rots or fusarium diseases. Root knot nematode causes galling of roots, and these galls interfere with the flow of water and nutrients to the plant. The plants will yellow, wilt, and respond poorly to fertilizer. And like I said, they have a patchy distribution in the field. So you can check the roots of your plants mid-season or later, but check earlier if you see any above ground symptoms. Like your plants are going down earlier in the season and you're not sure why. You can dig some up and see if you find any galls. Damage is more likely in sandier soils. Managing weeds can help, and using resistant varieties, though we have seen some resistance breaking in our area. Rotating with non-host crops, it also works well. So we're trying to look at this relationship between root knot nematode and fusariums and understand it a little better. And I'll be working with Amanda Hodson, nematologist and at UC Davis, and Cassandra Sweat, our extension pathologist. So I'm kind of moving into insects now, but this is kind of a crossover for insects and diseases. It's thrips and tomato spotted wilt virus. Tomato spotted wilt virus is vectored by thrips. Once acquired, the thrips can carry the disease for the rest of their life. It's acquired by immature thrips, but the adults are responsible for plant-to-plant transmission. The virus has a very wide host range, but luckily we do have an Agdia immunostrip kind of field test for tomato spotted wilt. So you can take a symptomatic leaf and crush it up in the little Agdia bag. And then it's kind of like a pregnancy test. You put the immunostrip into the liquid and it'll tell you positive or negative for tomato spotted wilt virus. This causes bronzing on the upper side of young leaves, which can lead to necrotic spots. And then you can also see the chlorotic spots on fruit in concentric rings, which is shown in this picture here. There's a great brochure on UCIPM, and you can find it through the pest management guidelines for tomatoes, and it gives a lot of information on tomato spotted wilt virus. Avoiding planting tomatoes next to onions, garlics, or cereals will help reduce your thrips pressure, and planting resistant varieties is great as well. Though we're seeing resistance breaking in the Fresno area. As far as I know, it has not been found this far north, and we're hoping it doesn't show up. Managing thrips is also helpful. Using insecticides like spinedoram, which is Radiant, spinosad, which is Entrust, dinotefuran is Venom, and then methomyl is Lanate. Roguing infected plants at the seedling stage, controlling weeds, and removing and destroying old plants. You want to make sure that there's no virus reservoir for the thrips to feed on. So if you see an infected plant, if you can, pull it out so the thrips can't feed on it and then spread the disease to more plants. For thrips, treating with foliar sprays early in the season and as needed throughout the season will help limit the spread of tomato spotted wilt as well. So I just want to briefly mention a few insect problems. Insects aren't generally a huge issue for tomato growers in the Sacramento Valley, but I just want to mention a few that can warrant control. A more exhaustive list and more information can be found in the pest management guidelines for tomatoes on the UCIPM website. So aphids, like the green peach aphid and early season aphids, they may result in wilting, but they're usually not of great concern unless the crop is water stressed. They also vector alfalfa mosaic virus, so avoid planting next to alfalfa fields if possible. I have seen that in some fields. It's usually not of economic damage though, but it can look a lot like tomato spotted wilt virus. Management, natural enemies are usually pretty good about controlling early season aphids, but if not, insecticides like Movento, Fulfill, and neonics like thiamethoxam, which is Actera, or Platinum, Flonicamid, which is Belief, and then other neonics like acetamiprid and imidacloprid, which are Assail and Admire Pro. Armyworms, in large numbers, they can attack foliage and fruit, creating irregular holes. These are usually superficial issues, and you'll have little loss when you're processing the tomatoes for paste, but they can cause more significant damage for whole pack or diced tomatoes. Natural enemies, again, are pretty good about controlling armyworms. And then insecticides to use would be chlorantraniliprole, which is Coragen, methoxyfenazide, or Intrepid, as Luis mentioned in his talk, and then spinedoram, which is Radiant. Russet mites, infestations of this mite progress up the plant from the bottom. The lower leaves will dry out, and then they'll frequently become bronze or russet colored, hence the name of the mite. Removing alternate hosts like nightshades and bindweed can be helpful to reduce russet mite problems, and also applying sulfur. For stink bugs are a much bigger problem down in Fresno County, but they cause dark pinpricks by their feeding, and that may be surrounded by a light discolored area that then turns yellow. And they also may carry yeast or pathogens that can cause bigger problems and more fruit decay than just their feeding damage. To manage stink bugs, destroying weeds like legumes, blackberries, Russian thistle, mustards, and little mallow is helpful because those are great overwintering hosts for adults. So you can get rid of those areas for them. For wireworms, which I know can be a problem for certain growers in the area, wireworms are the immature stage of click beetles, and they live in the soil, and they can chew on and bore into the larger stems and roots of transplants. So management includes diazinon, clothianidin, or belay, imidacloprid, and acetamiprid, again, Admire Pro and Assail, respectively. And just be sure to always follow label instructions for rates and timings for insecticides. And so with that, thank you for listening. If you'd like to subscribe to my newsletter, I post research updates and local pest information on vegetable crops in Colusa, Sutter, and Yuba counties. And you can find the subscription at the University of California Cooperative Extension Colusa County website under vegetable crops. And then I think with that, we'll launch the polls and I can take any questions. So I have 3 questions here for the polls. Which of the following is not a post-harvest pre-plant weed management method? How can you manage Fusarium wilt race 3 in your tomato field? And Fusarium diseases and crown rots are difficult to distinguish from one another in the field. So I'll give you a few minutes to answer those.
Thank you, Amber. And please post any questions for Amber in the chat.
I see one question in the chat. Could onion, garlic, and cereals be used as trap crops when growing tomato crops? Potentially they could. If you were going to control those for thrips, I would be a little worried about thrips move very quickly and they're very small. So, but if you planted them kind of next to the tomatoes, I think certain thrip species would be more attracted to the garlic and onion than to the tomatoes, but you may be increasing your risk for tomato spotted wilt virus. I know we've looked at onion also as a rotational crop for southern blight, because in tomatoes, you can't really spray any fungicides to control southern blight because of the tomato canopy. But with onions or garlic, it's easier to get to the crown. So you'll still see southern blight can also infect onion and garlic. So you have that risk, but it's easier to control because you can get to the soil and the crown of the plant where the southern blight microsclerotia are hanging out. Okay, we'll do another minute or so. 74% have answered the polls. Okay, do a few more seconds. Okay, let's share the results. Okay, so which of the following is not a post-harvest pre-plant weed management method? Transplanting is the correct answer. That is an at-planting weed management method. How can you manage Fusarium wilt race 3 in your tomato? Oh, great, 100% all of the above. Cleaning equipment, planting resistant varieties, and rotating out of tomato. Perfect. And then Fusarium diseases and crown rots are difficult to